Welcome to the deep dive. Ever feel like the economy is this giant, mysterious machine?
Definitely. It seems that way sometimes.
Well, today we're sort of cracking open the hood, taking a look at the blueprints. We've got a stack of macroeconomic theory textbooks here.
Yeah, the foundational stuff, concepts, models, the big debates.
Exactly. And think of this as your cheat sheet, a shortcut to understanding how things like national income, interest rates, global trade, how it all fits together.
Our mission really is to pull out those crucial insights.
So you can grasp the big picture, without getting totally lost in the jargon.
Precisely. We're going from the basic models economists use,
How they try to map it all out.
right, through to economic growth, business cycles, inflation, unemployment, the whole shebang.
And even how countries connect economically.
It's a lot, yeah. But we'll focus on the really important parts. Make it make sense.
Okay, let's start with the tools themselves. Macroeconomic models. Our sources stress these aren't like perfect replicas of reality, are they?
Oh, not at all. Think of them more like maps.
Maps, okay.
Yeah, a map simplifies a complex terrain, right? Shows you the key roads, landmarks. Models do that for the economy.
So their usefulness depends on.
Well, partly on whether the assumptions they make are realistic enough, and crucially, on the quality of the data you use to test them.
Right. A bad map or bad data won't help you much.
Exactly. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say.
Oh, okay. So from these abstract maps, let's zoom into something more concrete. The circular flow of income. The simple version is money just goes from households to firms.
That's the basic loop, yeah. People buy stuff, firms get money, pay wages, households get income.
But it's not quite that simple because people save.
Exactly. Households don't spend everything. They save. And that saving introduces, well, the financial sector, banks, investment firms, that sort of thing.
The intermediaries.
Right. Savings are like a withdrawal from that simple flow, a temporary detour, you could say.
Before potentially getting injected back in as investment. Which brings us to measuring the size of this whole flow. National income. We hear GDP, GNP all the time. Where do we start with these?
Often, gross national product, GNP, is a good starting point. Think of it as all the income earned by a country's residents, no matter where they earned it.
Okay, residents. Got it.
Then gross domestic product, GDP, is about the income generated within a country's borders. Doesn't matter if it's earned by residents or foreigners working there.
Ah, okay, so there's slightly different angle.
Yeah. If a foreign company operates in your country, its profits contribute to your GDP, but maybe not your GNP if the profits go back home.
And from GNP, we can get other measures.
Right. Subtract depreciation, the wear and tear on machines, buildings, and you get net national product, NNP.
Okay.
Then you adjust for things firms don't distribute, like retained profits or government enterprise surpluses, to get towards personal income.
And finally,
Subtract personal taxes, and you arrive at disposable income, yadudi. That's what people actually have left to spend or save.
it sounds like measuring this isn't straightforward.
Oh, it's not. Economists often use multiple methods, looking at spending, looking at production, and kind of cross-check them. Especially for tricky sectors like construction, they might blend different approaches.
Okay, so we've got ways to measure the economy size. Now, what determines that size, that income level? Let's start simple. A closed economy, just households and firms.
Okay. A key concept here is the consumption function, usually written as C equals A plus by Y.
C is consumption, Y is income.
What?
What A and B?
A is autonomous consumption, what people spend even with zero income. Basic needs, maybe using savings. B is the marginal propensity to consume, the MPC.
The fraction of extra income people spend.
Exactly. If you get an extra dollar, maybe you spend 75 cents. So B is 0.75.
So in the simple world, income equals spending, which is consumption plus investment.
Right. Y equals C plus I. And since C depends on Y, we can actually solve for the equilibrium level of income where everything balances out. If C equals 100 plus 0.75 Y, and say investment I is fixed at 50.
We can calculate Y.
You can find the specific Y where income equals planned spending.
Okay, now let's make it more real. Add the government. A three-sector model. Let's assume a balanced budget first. Government spending, G equals taxes, 2.
Okay, now total spending is Y equals C plus I plus G. But consumption depends on disposable income, YD, which is income after taxes, YT.
So C equals A plus BYT.
Right. And if G equals T, we can plug all that in and find the new, usually higher, equilibrium income.
Yeah.
For instance, using our C equals 100 plus 0.75 YD, maybe I equals 200, and G equals 100. We can calculate the new Y.
It'll be higher because of government spending.
Generally, yes.
But taxes aren't usually a fixed amount, right? They often depend on income.
That's a more realistic setup. We can model taxes as T plus TY. T0 is any fixed tax. T is the marginal tax rate.
So disposable income is Y minus all that, YTTY.
Exactly, or Y1TT. This changes the consumption function again. BT0 plus B1TY.
That looks more complicated.
It is. But what's really interesting here is the tax multiplier effect. Because taxes rise with income, any initial boost to spending, say from more government spending, has a somewhat smaller final impact on Y.
Why is that?
Because as income starts to rise, some of that increase leaks out immediately into higher taxes, dampening the multiplier process compared to the fixed tax case.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's open the doors. Foreign trade. The open economy model.
Right. So now our total demand equation is Y equals C plus I plus G plus M. X is exports, M is imports.
Exports add to demand for our stuff, imports subtract.
Correct. And just like consumption, imports often depend on our income. Higher income, we tend to buy more from abroad.
So we can model imports too, like M plus my Y.
Exactly. M is autonomous imports. M is the marginal propensity to import the fraction of an extra dollar of income spent on imports.
And this adds another layer to the multiplier.
Yes, the foreign trade multiplier. Imports act as another leakage, similar to saving in taxes.
Oh.
So increases in spending have a smaller effect on domestic income in an open economy because some of that spending goes towards foreign goods.
Okay, we have these basic models. Let's dig into the components. Consumption is huge. What drives it? Keynes had some ideas.
He did. His fundamental psychological law. Sounds grand, doesn't it?
A bit. What's the gist?
Basically, as income rises, consumption rises, but by less than the income increase. Your MPC B is positive, but less than 1.
You spend some, you save some of any extra income.
Right. He based this on, well, what he called a priori knowledge of human nature and detailed facts of experience. This is the core of the absolute income theory. Current spending depends mostly on current income.
But surely it's more complex. Our spending isn't just about today's paycheck.
Absolutely not. There's the relative income hypothesis, Duesenberry's idea.
Which is that
We're influenced by others' spending. Keeping up with the Joneses, sort of. Also, our past peak income matters. We resist cutting consumption when income falls temporarily. Consumption habits are sticky downwards.
That feels true. And unexpected windfalls.
People might not spend it all right away. They might save more initially until they adjust their standard.
And then there's the longer-term view.
Yes, the intertemporal choice model. Thinking about consumption now versus consumption later.
Like saving for retirement.
Exactly. It involves indifference curves representing preferences between present and future consumption and a budget constraint across time. People choose the point where they maximize satisfaction given their lifetime resources and the interest rate.
Okay, let's shift to the other big private spending component. Investment by businesses. What drives that?
Expected profitability versus cost. The key concept is the marginal efficiency of capital, MEC.
The expected rate of return on one more unit of capital, like a new machine.
Exactly. Businesses estimate that return. Then there's the marginal efficiency of investment, MEI, schedule, which shows how much total investment the economy will undertake at different interest rates.
So higher interest rates mean less investment.
Generally, yes. Interest is the cost of borrowing funds, or the opportunity cost of using internal funds. If the interest rate is higher than the expected return, MEC, the project doesn't happen.
And the MEC itself isn't fixed.
No, it tends to fall as you add more and more capital, diminishing returns. So firms invest up to the point where the MEC just equals the interest rate.
Is there a link to the stock market here? Tobin's Q.
Yes, Tobin's Q theory provides another perspective. Q is the ratio of a firm's market value, what the stock market thinks it's worth, to the replacement cost of its assets.
How much it would cost to rebuild it from scratch.
Right. If Q was greater than 1, the market values the installed capital more than its replacement cost. That encourages new investment. Buying new machines is cheaper than buying the existing company's stock to get those machines.
And if Q is less than 1?
It might be cheaper to acquire existing assets by buying other firms rather than building new ones. Less incentive for new physical investment.
All right, let's pivot to something fundamental. Money. Our sources say it's comparable to the wheel or fire. That's a big claim.
It is, but think about what money does. First, medium of exchange. It avoids the nightmare of barter.
The double coincidence of wants. I need what you have and you need what I have.
Exactly. Money solves that. Huge reduction in transaction costs. Second, it's a measure of value, a unit of account. Everything priced in dollars or euros or yen makes comparison easy.
Imagine trying to remember how many chickens a cow is worth versus a loaf of bread.
A nightmare. Money simplifies all that pricing. Third, it's a store of value. You can hold wealth in the form of money to spend later.
Though maybe not the best store of value if there's inflation.
True, other assets might be better for that, but money is usually the most liquid, easily usable for transactions.
Given its importance, controlling the money supply seems critical.
Absolutely. Too little money can choke off activity. Too much fuels inflation. So measuring it, understanding how it's determined is essential.
Which brings us to the money multiplier.
Right. This links the monetary base, that's currency in circulation, plus bank reserves held at the central bank, sometimes called high-powered money, to the total money supply, like M1 or M2.
And the size of this multiplier effect depends on?
Two key ratios. First, the currency deposit ratio, see how much cash the public wants to hold relative to their bank deposits.
Okay.
Second, the reserve deposit ratio, the fraction of deposits banks hold as reserves, either required or excess.
And there's a formula.
Yep. The money multiplier M is 1 plus C, C plus R. So a change in the monetary base, H, gets multiplied by M to give the change in the total money supply.
There's also a deposit multiplier.
Similar idea, focusing just on how deposits change. The change in deposits, DD, is related to the change in the base, DH, by DD keys 1, C plus R, DH. It's not the simple one you sometimes see in basic explanations because it accounts for currency drain.
Okay, that's the supply side. What about the demand for money? Why hold it?
Keynes identified three main motives. Transaction motive. We need cash for everyday buying and selling.
Makes sense?
Precautionary motive. Holding some money just in case for unexpected needs or opportunities.
Rainy day fund.
Sort of. And third, the speculative motive. This is holding money as an asset, as an alternative to, say, bonds.
How does that work?
Keynes linked this to interest rate expectations. If you expect interest rates to rise soon, meaning bond prices will fall, you might prefer to hold cash now and buy bonds later when they're cheaper.
So speculative demand for money increases when you expect rates to rise.
Or rather, when you expect rates to fall less than the market consensus, or even rise. It's about your view relative to the current rate. If you think rates will fall significantly, you'd buy bonds now. This creates an inverse relationship between current interest rates and speculative money demand.
Tobin added to this.
Yes, with his portfolio optimization idea. People don't just hold either cash or bonds. They hold a mix, balancing risk and return. Higher interest rates make bonds more attractive, higher return, so people might shift their portfolio towards bonds and hold less cash.
Okay, let's bring the goods market, investment saving, and the money market, money supply demand, together. The ISLM model sounds important.
It's a cornerstone of intermediate macro. The IS curve shows combinations of interest rates, I, and income, Y, where the goods market is in equilibrium. Planned investment equals planned saving.
And it slips downwards.
Usually, yes.
Yeah.
Because a lower interest rate encourages more investment spending, which through the multiplier leads to a higher equilibrium level of income.
Okay, and the LM curve.
That shows combinations of I and Y, where the money market is in equilibrium. Money demand equals money supply.
Why does it slope upwards?
Typically because higher income, Y, increases the demand for money for transactions. With a fixed money supply, the interest rate has to rise to encourage people to hold less money and restore equilibrium.
So the overall equilibrium for the whole economy is where they cross.
Exactly. The intersection gives the unique combination of income, Y, and interest rate, I, where both the goods market and the money market are simultaneously in balance. We can even write down equations for IS and LM and solve them algebraically.
And these curves can shift.
Oh, definitely. Anything that changes autonomous spending, like government spending, autonomous investment, or autonomous consumption, shifts the IS curve. An increase shifts it right.
Leading to higher income.
Yes, and usually a higher interest rate too, as the economy moves along the LM curve. And anything that changes the money supply shifts the LM curve. An increase in money supply shifts LM right.
Lowering interest rates and raising income.
Correct. The model's really useful for analyzing the effects of policy changes or economic shocks.
Let's talk about fiscal policy, government spending, and taxes in this ISLM world, and this idea of crowding out.
Right. So in the three-sector ISLM model, government spending, G, is part of the IS equation, and taxes, T, affect consumption. An increase in G shifts IS to the right, aiming to boost income.
Yeah.
Crowding out is the idea that this increase in G, possibly financed by borrowing, pushes up the demand for loanable funds, raising the interest rate.
And higher interest rate.
It can discourage or crowd out private investment spending. So the final increase in income might be less, than the simple multiplier would suggest, because the rise in G is partly offset by a fall in I.
A key debate, I imagine.
Huge. Keynesians tend to think it's less significant, especially in a recession, while others think it can be substantial. The model also lets us see what happens if you combine fiscal and monetary policy, like increasing G but also increasing the money supply to keep interest rates down.
Let's go international again. Balance of payments, BOP. What's that tracking?
It's the country's account book with the rest of the world for a given period. It records all economic transactions between residents and non-residents.
Like trade.
Yes. The current account covers trade in goods and services, plus income flows, like dividends, and transfers, like aid. The capital and financial account tracks flows of assets, buying foreign stocks, foreign direct investment, bank lending.
Surplus versus deficit.
If inflows exceed outflows, it's a BOP surplus. If outflows exceed inflows, it's a deficit. We can also model a BOP function relating the overall balance, or maybe just the capital account K, to things like the domestic interest rate relative to foreign rates and changes in income affecting imports.
Okay, shifting gears to the really long run, economic growth. What explains why some countries get richer over decades and others don't?
Early models like Herod-Domar focused heavily on the saving rate and the capital output ratio. Basically, more saving means more investment, which increases the capital stock and allows for more output. Very investment-focused.
Then came Solow.
The Solow neoclassical growth model is fundamental. It says growth comes from three sources: growing capital stock through saving and investment, growth in the labor force, and crucially, technological progress.
And technology is key for sustained growth per person.
In the basic Solow model, yes. Without technological progress, the economy reaches a steady state where capital per worker and output per worker stop growing, just due to diminishing returns to capital. Increasing the saving rate can get you to a higher level of steady-state income, but not a permanently faster growth rate of income per person. Only ongoing tech progress does that in this model.
What's the golden rule?
It asks, what saving rate and corresponding steady-state capital stock maximizes consumption per person in the long run? Saving too little means too little capital and output. Saving too much means a huge capital stock, but so much output goes just to replace depreciating capital that consumption suffers. The golden rule finds the balance.
But Solow treated technology as just happening.
Pretty much, yeah. It was exogenous, falling like manna from heaven. That led to endogenous growth theories later on.
Which try to explain technology.
Exactly. They model technological progress as resulting from intentional actions within the economy, R&D spending, education, human capital, learning by doing, the economics of ideas, makes the source of long-run growth internal to the model.
Okay, let's zoom back into the short to medium run. Business cycles, fluctuations, the ADAS framework.
Right. Aggregate demand, AD, and aggregate supply, AS. A key idea for the short run is price stickiness. Wages and prices don't adjust instantly.
Unlike in some classical models.
Right. Because prices are sticky, shifts in demand primarily affect output and employment in the short run. The AD curve shows the relationship between the overall price level and the total quantity of goods and services demanded. It slopes down.
Why does it slope down?
Several reasons. Wealth effect. Lower prices make existing money holdings worth more, boosting spending. Interest rate effect. Lower prices reduce money demand, lowering interest rates, boosting investment. Exchange rate effect. Lower prices can make exports cheaper.
And aggregate supply.
We distinguish short-run ARIS, SRES, from long-run ARIS. LRS. LRS is upward sloping. Firms are willing to supply more at higher prices, often because input costs like wages are sticky in the short run. LRS is vertical.
Vertical.
Yes, at the economy's natural rate of output or potential output. In the long run, output is determined by the economy's resources. Capital, labor, technology, not the price level. Prices fully adjust.
So short-run fluctuations are shifts in AD or SRS?
Primarily. A drop in AD causes a recession, lower output, maybe lower prices. An adverse supply shock, like a sudden oil price hike, shifts SRES left.
Leading to?
Stagflation. Stagnation, lower output plus inflation, higher prices. A nasty combination.
Can you derive AD from ISLM?
Yes, you can. Think about what happens in ISLM if the overall price level P changes. If P falls, the real money supply MP increases.
Which shifts the LM curve right.
Exactly. Shifting LM right leads to a lower interest rate and higher equilibrium income Y in the ISLM diagram. So a lower P corresponds to a higher Y that traces out the downward sloping AD curve.
Ah, clever. So policy changes in ISLM shift AD.
Correct. An increase in the money supply shifts LM right, which means AD shifts right, more demand at any given price level. An increase in government spending shifts IS right, which also shifts AD right.
Though maybe moderated by crowding out affecting the IS shift.
Yes, the extent of the crowding out effect influences how much the IS curve shifts, and therefore how much the AD curve shifts in response to fiscal policy.
Let's touch on exchange rates again. Fixed versus flexible.
Yeah, the Bretton Woods system after WWII was mostly fixed rates against the US dollar. Central banks had to intervene to keep their currency within a narrow band.
What does that mean for policy?
Under fixed rates, monetary policy often becomes dedicated to maintaining the exchange rate, limiting its use for managing domestic inflation or unemployment. Flexible rates, determined by market forces, give more monetary policy independence. The Mundell-Fleming model is the standard framework for analyzing this in an open economy ISLM context.
Okay, inflation and unemployment. The Phillips curve. Is there a trade-off?
Originally, Phillips found a negative relationship in UK data. Lower unemployment seemed correlated with higher wage inflation. This suggested a policy trade-off.
You could choose lower unemployment if you accepted higher inflation.
That was the initial interpretation. But then economists like Friedman and Phelps pointed out the role of expectations.
The expectations augmented Phillips curve.
Right. They argued the stable relationship is between unexpected inflation and unemployment. In the long run, people adjust their inflation expectations.
So the trade-off disappears.
In the long run, yes. The economy returns to its natural rate of unemployment, regardless of the steady inflation rate. The long-run Phillips curve is vertical at the natural rate. You can only keep unemployment below the natural rate by constantly accelerating inflation, fooling people repeatedly.
The short-run curves can still exist, but it shifts.
Exactly. If expected inflation rises, the short-run Phillips curve shifts upwards. You get more inflation for any given unemployment rate.
Can we make ADS dynamic, incorporating inflation expectations?
Yes, dynamic ADS models do just that. They explicitly model how inflation and output evolve over time, taking into account how expectations are formed and how the central bank might react to shocks.
So a demand shock might raise output and inflation initially.
But that might raise inflation expectations, shifting the short-run AS curve up, potentially leading to further adjustments depending on policy responses. It gets more complex, but arguably more realistic.
Government debt. Always a hot topic. Traditional view versus Ricardian equivalence.
In the traditional, often Keynesian-linked view is that, say, a tax cut financed by borrowing boosts disposable income and consumption, stimulating AD. Future taxes are maybe ignored or heavily discounted by current consumers.
Okay. And Ricardian equivalence.
Proposed by Barrow, based on Ricardo's earlier idea. It argues rational, forward-looking consumers understand that government borrowing today must be repaid with higher taxes tomorrow.
So they save the tax cut.
Exactly. They save it to pay the future taxes, so the tax cut has no effect on consumption or aggregate demand. It just changes the timing of taxes.
Which view is right?
Still debated. Reality is likely somewhere in between. Depends on how forward-looking people are, whether they expect to bear the future tax burden, borrowing constraints, etc.
Let's revisit consumption with microfoundations. What does that add?
It tries to ground consumption theory in individual optimizing behavior. The intertemporal budget constraint is key. How lifetime resources constrain lifetime spending.
And Friedman's permanent income hypothesis.
Right. It argues consumption depends not just on current income, but on permanent income, a sort of expected average lifetime income.
So temporary income changes have less effect on spending.
Much less. A one-time bonus gets largely saved, while a perceived permanent salary increase gets mostly spent. It helps explain why consumption is smoother than income.
Back to banks and money creation, fractional reserves.
Banks legally only have to hold a fraction of deposits as reserves. They can lend out the rest.
And that lending creates money.
Yes. When Bank A makes a loan, the borrower deposits it in Bank B. Bank B holds some reserves, lends out the rest. That loan becomes a deposit in Bank C, and so on. An initial injection of reserves leads to a multiplied expansion of deposits, and thus the money supply.
The simple multiplier being 1 over the reserve ratio.
In the simplest case, yes. But as we saw, we need to account for people holding currency and banks potentially holding excess reserves. Banks are special because their liabilities, checkable deposits, are widely used as money.
And bank runs can reverse this.
Drastically. If people lose faith and withdraw cash, increasing C, and banks get scared and hold more reserves, increasing Grazer, the multiplier shrinks and the money supply contracts sharply, as happened in the Great Depression.
We talked about money demand motives. What about portfolio theories more broadly?
They view the demand for money as part of a larger decision about how to allocate wealth across various assets: money, bonds, stocks, real estate, etc.
Based on risk and return.
Exactly. The demand for money should depend on its return, often zero or low for M1, its risk, and its liquidity relative to all other assets. For M1, because it's often dominated, other assets offer higher returns with similar risk, its main appeal is liquidity for transactions. Portfolio theories become more important for broader money measures that include interest-bearing assets.
Let's talk inflation costs. Why is it generally seen as bad?
Several reasons. Shoe leather costs. The time and effort people spend trying to minimize cash holdings because inflation erodes its value.
Running to the bank more often.
Metaphorically, yes. Menu costs. The real costs businesses face, changing price lists, catalogs, vending machines.
Annoying for restaurants.
And others. Inflation can distort relative prices if some adjust faster than others, messing up resource allocation. Tax systems often interact badly with inflation. It acts as nominal capital gains. It creates uncertainty, complicates planning, and can arbitrarily redistribute wealth. Unexpected inflation hurts lenders and helps borrowers.
Are these costs huge?
Big debate. Probably depends on the level and predictability of inflation. High, volatile inflation is clearly bad. Costs of low, stable inflation are more controversial. Some even argue a little inflation helps labor markets adjust.
What about the cost of reducing inflation, the sacrifice ratio?
That measures how much output, usually percentage points of GDP, is estimated to be lost for each percentage point reduction in inflation. Disinflation policies often involve slowing the economy, causing temporary unemployment. Rational expectations theorists argue if anti-inflation policy is credible, the cost could be lower as expectations adjust quickly.
We've encountered different viewpoints. Can you briefly map out the main schools of macroeconomic thought?
Sure. Classical pre-1930s emphasized self-adjusting markets. Keynesian revolution, post-depression, focused on aggregate demand, sticky wage prices, role for government stabilization, monetarism, Friedman, 1960s-70s, stress money supplies role, advocated rules. New classical, Lucas, Sargent, 1970s, 80s, introduced rational expectations, often implying policy ineffectiveness. Real business cycle theory saw fluctuations driven by real shocks, like technology. New Keynesians tried to provide micro-foundations for sticky price wages within optimizing models. Post-Keynesians emphasize fundamental uncertainty, finance, and income distribution. It's a constant evolution and debate.
And we saw a renewed focus on growth recently.
Yeah, starting in the 1980s, a big renaissance in growth theory, moving beyond just short-run stabilization. Endogenous growth, convergence debates, role of institutions, trade, geography, lots of focus there now.
Finally, back to international. Balance of payments, adjustments, and exchange rates again.
Right. How do imbalances correct? Under flexible rates, the exchange rate can adjust a deficit, might lead to currency depreciation, boosting exports, cutting imports. Under fixed rates, it might require policy changes, like tighter monetary policy to attract capital inflows or reduce import demand, or using up foreign reserves.
Mundell Fleming helps analyze this.
Yes, it shows how fiscal and monetary policy effectiveness differ dramatically depending on the exchange rate regime and the degree of capital mobility. For example, under perfect capital mobility and fixed rates, monetary policy becomes ineffective for influencing output. Fiscal policy is powerful. It flips under flexible rates.
And fixed rates mean you can import inflation.
Yes, if your trading partners have higher inflation, maintaining the fixed rate can force your price level up too. Devaluation is an option under fixed rates, but its effects on the trade balance depend on various elasticities, the J-curve effect. Concepts like the law of one price, similar goods costing the same internationally after exchange rates, are benchmarks, though often violated in reality due to transport costs, tariffs, etc.
Wow, okay, that was a seriously deep dive. It's amazing, really, seeing how these concepts connect individual choices, market forces, government actions, global interactions.
It is a complex web, isn't it? But hopefully, seeing the connections makes it a bit less mysterious.
For me, what stood out was just how much economic thought itself evolves. These aren't settled laws of nature. They're theories constantly being tested, debated, refined, based on evidence and, well, real-world events.
Absolutely. And appreciating the underlying assumptions of each model is crucial,
Yeah.
Knowing their simplifications, maps, not territories, helps understand their power, but also their limits.
So for you listening, we really hope this journey through macroeconomics has helped clarify some of the forces shaping the world around you.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. We talked a lot about expectations, how what we think will happen influences consumption, investment, inflation, policy effectiveness.
Right, expectations seem to pop up everywhere.
So maybe reflect on your own economic decisions. What assumptions are you making about the future, your job, inflation, interest rates. How much certainty or uncertainty do you factor in when you save, spend, or invest?
That's a great question. Food for thought. If anything we discussed today caught your interest, definitely dig deeper. There's always more to learn.
Always.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.